Oh, hey there! Welcome to Werezilla's Retrospective. I'm your host, Werezilla. It's good to see you all, it honestly is. Because I can only imagine what would happen if a zombie apocalypse happened and you all died. I don't know what I'd do with myself. Fortunately, we all have plenty of experience based on zombie fiction, thanks to The Walking Dead. A comic book that really shows off how it was inspired by the original George Romero of the Dead trilogy, by focusing not on the zombies being gruesome or being excused to show tons of blood and gore. It has that, of course, that's a given, but The Walking Dead's true danger is other humans. Some characters have become better people, while others devolve into monsters. This rings just as true in the TV show that followed, as well as the games. The games in particular run another popular notion: choice. What you have the protagonist of the first season, Lee, say and do will affect what happens to the plot. Of course, when it comes to the matter of choice in games, first season of The Walking Dead did a pretty good job. It's where we get to the second season where things start to become problematic. We open on episode 1, All That Remains, with Clementine, the cute little girl Lee was watching over in the previous season, now in the role of the protagonist. She and the survivors from the previous season, Krista and Omid, come across a roadside rest stop and stop for a minute, which turns out to be a really bad idea because not only does it exist as an unnecessary tutorial, but becomes someone else shows up and tries to rob Clementine, and ends up shooting Omid. So much for all the trouble we went through last season trying to get him medicine. We cut to 16 months later, and since neither of them brings this up, I guess it's up to me. Krista was very pregnant before the time skip. What happened to the baby? Miscarriage. They got attacked and the baby didn't survive. Didn't have enough food. I guess it's up for us to decide. Though Krista's plan is to head north to a sanctuary in Wellington, a wrench is thrown into that plan when a group of thugs ambush the two, separating Clementine from Krista. Clementine finds an abandoned camp the next morning as well as a dog. But this isn't the designated apocalypse canine companion. Not after Clementine finds some food. Yeah, if you walk away without putting the dog out of its misery, then you're more jaded than I am. Clementine then runs into Luke and Pete, followed by the rest of their group. None of them, including Carlos here, who is a doctor, can tell Clementine's bite is from a dog and not a zombie. While some members of the want to give Clem a chance, the rest decide to take their chances and have Clem stay in the shed for the night. Clementine sneaks into the group's house in the middle of the night, acquiring some medicine for her arm, and meeting Carlos's daughter, Sarah. I'll have more to say about her later, but for now I'll just point out that despite being older than Clementine, her behavior indicates that mentally and emotionally she might as well be younger. So after we, the player, have to stitch Clementine's arm up in a frankly cringe-inducing QuickTime event, and facing off a zombie that gets into the shed, Luke's group finally believes her and lets Clementine stay in the house. Luke and Alvin are the most welcoming in the group, though Carlos and Rebecca here are not.
She's my little girl. She's all I have left. And I would ask that you stay away from her.
I knew you were going to be a fucking problem.
The next day, Clementine goes with Pete and his nephew Nick to the river and comes across Roman's group from the 400 Days DLC, and they've been slaughtered. Before Pete and Nick have a chance to explain what happened, zombies show up, and episode 1 ends with a choice. Take cover with Pete, who was bitten in the chaos, or Nick, who is surrounded. Like the choice between Carly and Doug in the first season. Well, not really. No matter who you go with, Nick lives, Pete dies, and Clementine gets separated from the person she went with either way. While Luke and the others go out looking for the person who stayed behind, Clementine gets a visit from our villain, Bill Carver. I smell a recurring plot point. After a 5-day trip that we don't see, the group comes across a ski lodge in the mountains, and it's here where Clementine is reunited with Kenny from the first game. Which is a bit dubious depending on how he got separated from Lee in the first season. The Krista version is a little less likely than the Ben one, but whatever, things are looking up. Clementine and the others can take shelter in the ski lodge with Kenny and his new lady friend, as well as a teacher he met up with since season 1, and you don't believe that for a second, do you? Yeah, I didn't think so. The power goes out, zombies show up, and they're followed by Carver and his men. And Carver ends up killing the teacher. He could potentially kill Alvin too, depending on whether or not you urge Kenny to take a second shot at Carver. Either way, episode 2, A House Divided, ends with Clementine and the group captured. In episode 3, In Harm's Way, Carver takes the group to his camp, which turns out to be a heavily fortified hardware store. At which point we learn Carver and the governor from the comics would get along just fine.
Bill! No! 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 Please! Ah!
Weakness. Incompetence. It puts us all at risk.
Needless to say, the group plans on escaping, Kenny having his own plan, as well as Luke. But Luke's plan falls apart when he gets captured by Carver, and Kenny, taking credit for a theft Clementine did to keep her safe, gets a severe beating, permanently damaging his eye. Clementine activates the store's speakers to lure a horde of zombies towards them, and if Alvin's still alive, he sacrifices himself to help Clementine escape. More on that in a bit. During the escape, the group runs into Carver one last time, and Kenny proceeds to beat him to death with a crowbar, with the option to have Clem stay and watch. Damn. With the help of a couple more characters, a pragmatic loner by the name of Jane, a tough nice guy named Mike, and Bonnie, another character from the 400 Days DLC, Clementine and company manages to escape the hardware store. Though Carlos takes a bullet from one of Carver's men, and Kenny's lady friend gets bitten. You can cut off her hand to save her, but the very next thing that happens in the next episode, Amid the Ruins, is she immediately gets bitten more, and has to be put down before she turns. That really is the problem with this season. You're not really deciding the different paths to take. You're just delaying the time at which certain characters die. Fucking... Here's what I mean. Remember Nick? Someone who really hasn't done anything since episode 2? The reason is because it's possible for him to die at the ski lodge before Carver shows up. He then proceeds to have the least amount of lines of any character in episode 3, then when everyone gets separated, and when Clem and Jane find him in the beginning of episode 4, he's already zombified. Same with Alvin. Carver didn't kill him in the ski lodge? Then he's taken out of action for most of episode 3 before he dies in Carver's office. And then there's poor little Sarah. You come across her and Luke stuck in a trailer surrounded by zombies. Sarah's shell-shocked over Carlos's death and won't move, leaving Clementine with the option of either slapping some sense into her so she will follow the group out, or leave her behind to die. Only for her to get pinned under a fallen deck and eaten by zombies and later in the same episode. This would actually be tragic if not for the fact that designers hate Sarah and are happy when she dies, their personal preferred choice being leaving her behind to die in the trailer. The emotionally scarred, possibly mentally challenged young girl. If you did not like this character, why did you even include her in the frickin' game? What makes it all the more disturbing is Sarah's fixed death happens within minutes of Rebecca giving birth, meaning her death is immediately forgotten about. But moving right along, another choice comes up the next day. Keep moving your way until Rebecca is well enough to move. But once again, it really doesn't matter because regardless of whether or not you side with Kenny or Luke on this decision, Rebecca still collapses on the road, you still get ambushed by some Russian gangsters, whom you may or may not have robbed earlier in the episode, Rebecca dies with her baby in her arms, and a shootout ensues. The only difference is who shoots Rebecca as she starts to reanimate, Clementine or Kenny. Anyway, we're on the home stretch with the 5th and final episode, No Going Back.
This don't have to get any worse than it already is! You can just go! English, motherfucker!
English, motherfucker! Do you speak it?
The gangsters are taken out, save one, a little guy named Arvo, who promises to bring the group somewhere he stashed food and medicine, though Kenny wants nothing to do with him. And everyone seems to side against Kenny on this one. Why? Why should we trust this guy? Whatever, so Luke laments he's the only member of the original cabin survivors that's still alive, Rebecca's baby is given the name Alvin Jr., and the group is given a brief respite. Because of course that happens. Understandably pissed, Kenny loses his cool and starts beating Arvo. And the moral dissonance is really starting to get to me. Rick, the protagonist of the comics, has done far worse, and while they were definitely dark acts, it wasn't portrayed as him going overboard by his group. So why it applies to Kenny here, I'm not sure. But once Mike, Bonnie, and Arvo abandon them, it becomes a lot clearer. It was used to create a conflict. See, all throughout the 4th and 5th episodes, Jane has been approaching Clementine, trying to say Kenny is dangerous and she should ditch the guy. Even though the contrivances that lead us to this ending are, well, contrived, they do lead to some actual outcomes that are different from one another. You know, at least until they retcon all of them at the beginning of Season 3 until one outcome. Here's what happens. Clementine, Kenny, and Jane get separated in a snowstorm, and when they regroup, Jane shows up alone without AJ. Losing his shit, Kenny tries to kill Jane. And here's where you are given the option to shoot Kenny to stop him, or let him kill Jane. Regardless, you discover AJ is still alive. If Jane's alive, she explains herself, and it's hard to swallow.
I should never have lied to you, but I thought it was the only way you'd see. Oh my God. Kenny, you have to forgive me. Please. We can just leave all this behind us. Please.
Yeah, the option is there, but I wouldn't take it. If Kenny survived the fight, then he will even call attention to the fact that Jane could just as easily have explained what she was doing once the fight started. That was what makes this decision easier for me than most. Unless I guess you just really didn't like Kenny. Maybe if we were shown Kenny getting violent and angry for no reason, then it would be more justified. But every time it happens in the game, like with Carver and Arvo, he's well within his rights to be pissed. And Jane, despite being described as a cold pragmatist, makes really dumb decisions over the course of this game. One that could have gotten AJ killed, and can get herself killed at that. Anyway, so the second season comes to a close in a number of different ways. Either Clementine and AJ are all alone, either because Kenny and Jane died in the fight, or Clementine abandoned the survivor. Clementine, Kenny, and AJ make it to Wellington, or Clementine, Jane, and AJ return to Carver's now abandoned hardware store. And there are variations to those endings too. In the Kenny endings, Clementine can either go into Wellington while Kenny leaves on his own, or she stays with him. In the Jane endings, a family shows up at the store, and you have the option to either let them in or deny them entry at gunpoint. So finally, at the very end, a choice actually has multiple consequences, and not just delaying when a character dies. Now obviously the programmers can't design for literally anything, so they have to allude to choice because they can't actually give it. But these are adventure games, not huge RPGs like BioWare games. The development budget isn't for level design or realistic graphics, so why we couldn't have more branching paths, I'm not sure. This was an issue with Season 1. Moments like Carly and Doug living and dying at interchangeable moments, Lily staying or being kicked out of the group, but those had a little more variation to it. It wasn't much, but it had more than what we have here. You may have noticed plot-wise we were going strong up until Jane became a regular character. Part of me wonders if there was a planned storyline, but there was a change at some point, and as a result, episodes 4 and 5 suffered. They already had a conflict between Luke and Kenny, so there was no need to create Jane. Or maybe there was, as Luke likely wouldn't try to confront Kenny in actual brawl or do what Jane did with AJ. He's also driven by his emotions like Kenny, so the theme the game was trying to go with, pragmatism versus emotion, forcing a decision that would change Clementine's outlook, but that in practice doesn't quite work because of Jane's motives and Kenny's actions don't gel with the conflict properly. Another problem you may have noticed The Walking Dead has that unfortunately this game does too. It has a bad habit of giving us a lot of characters, but frankly doesn't give them enough to do. Oh, fuck! We are given a lot of characters in the comic, the show, and the games, and while we are given a small circle of leaders among the survivors, including the protagonist, a foil, someone loyal to the protagonist who may or may not be the aforementioned foil after character development kicks in, a child companion, and one or two decent fighters with common sense, but they are just a couple of exceptions. With the rest of the group having really only a couple lines, appearing in scenes but not really contributing until they die. Or alternatively, they go long stretches of time before they do anything important, and then die. And sadly, it's here too. We are given plenty of characters, but how many of them did I actually talk about to any significant degree? Maybe a quarter of them. I know it seems like I'm picking at this game, because I really didn't want to go into this, considering I liked the previous game and, to a lesser extent, this one. An apocalyptic scenario where the protagonist is a young girl is an interesting one. I just wish Clementine was in a better handled story. And as minimalistic as the graphics and art style is, there's nothing really wrong with it. Also, if there's anything I appreciate, it's that this game and its predecessor, as well as other recent Telltale games, is that the dialogue choices are exactly what they say they are, and not like the vague BioWare dialogue wheel, or whatever the fuck Fallout 4 was trying to accomplish. And with the variations in the endings, I am curious as to what will happen with Season 3, and we know there will be, I've seen screenshots. What are you looking at me like that for? I'm not Tyrese. I can't knock him out in one hit. Gotta do a little extra. Anyway, it's time for me to find a spot where there are less zombies. Preferably somewhere cold.